All right, so welcome to the Front Row Podcast. This is Coach Mark Gottfried, and I'm really fired up today because I've got a coach that I have admired from a distance for, probably 40 years. I can go back and we'll talk about it, but watching your team when you were the coach at American University way back when. But Gary Williams, Hall of Fame basketball coach, both the National or the Naismith Hall of Fame and College Basketball Hall of Fame, and won a national championship in Maryland, had a great run at Ohio State, Boston College, ACC championships, Big East championships. We can go through all that, just a marvelous career. But Gary, welcome, and how are you? How you doing?
Thanks, Mark. I'm a little jealous of you being out there in California with the weather. But other than that, I'm doing well.
Well, like I mentioned, here's where I'm going to start. So before we really dive into, you had such a great career, and really what I want to do is kind of pick at you a little bit and kind of find out kind of your whole journey and the whole story, which I kind of know, but maybe I don't even know it as well. But I'm going to say this story. I was living in Mobile, Alabama. It would have been 1981, and my father was the assistant athletic director at South Alabama University at that time, later became the AD, but you brought a basketball team in, I hope I get this right now, from American University to play South Alabama, and you had a terrific little point guard. I can't remember his name, but boy, was he good, and I remember just sitting in the crowd, and I think you beat him that night, but I was just amazed with your team and your coaching. So from that point on, 81, I've always kind of just sat back and watched and admired you. But did I get the story right? Was that American University?
Yeah, we played in the tournament down there, and back then I was a head coach. I guess that was my third year as a head coach. We probably only ran the flex against man-to-man defense, and we just stayed with it and stayed with it and stayed with it. We had the patience, to run it, which today I don't think, I don't see it being run by any teams really to any extent. But it was tough to cover, especially if you only saw it that one time. And back then, it wasn't like American U was on TV all the time or anything like that. It was hard to know when you went out of your area what the other team was like. And I think we had an advantage going in there, and it was a big win for us. I mean, that really helped us, and it established us as a pretty good basketball team.
And if you think about it, you go back, and Cliff Ellis was the head coach at South Alabama.
Yeah.
Cliff's had a marvelous career, and he's won everywhere he's ever been. And then you've had such an amazing career. But back then, you don't realize kind of what you're watching is two guys that going to win a lot of college basketball games through your career. So you played at Maryland and later coached there, but tell me a little bit about how you just got started. And did you always want to coach, and was there something about it that just kind of drew you into coaching?
Well, when I went to Maryland in the early 60s to play, you couldn't play your freshman year. You couldn't play on the varsity. So, it was, our freshman team was really good. We were like 16-1, and we all thought we were still going to play in the NBA after college. And then my sophomore year, we played North Carolina, and they had Billy Cunningham on the team. And Billy Cunningham, one of the top 50 all-time great pro players. I wasn't guarding him, obviously. They had somebody that was better than me guarding Cunningham. But I was guarding a guy in the corner, and all the coach talked about. And my coach was Bud Milliken, who had played for Henry Iba. So we were really into the half-court, man-to-man, sagging defense. And all we did to practice was learn how to take charges and things like that. And so Billy had the ball at the top of the circle. I was in the corner. My guy wasn't a good shooter, so I came way off of him, got right in front of the basket as Billy drove that left-handed drive that he had. And I had him. I know he was going to go right in. I was braced. I was ready to take the charge. Next thing I know, I see this Converse going over my shoulder, and he's dunking it on me. And right about then, I knew that playing probably wasn't going to be an option after college. And that's when I started to look at things from a coaching perspective. And I was lucky, to be in the ACC and see the great coaches that they had in there, and, just see what they did and try to pick up things from that.
You had such a amazing career, but Talk a little bit about the opportunity you had at American U, right there in the D.C. area, and what that opportunity probably did for you throughout your career.
Well, I was very fortunate to get a head coaching job when I was 32. I had been a high school coach for 3 years in New Jersey, and then Tom Davis, great coach, Boston College, Stanford, Iowa, just tremendous coach. He was a graduate assistant when I was at Maryland my last year, and he told me, he said, if I ever get a head coaching job in college, I'll hire you as my assistant. And you know how that goes. Guys say nice things to you sometimes, but it doesn't really turn out that way. But Tom got the Lafayette job, and he hired me as assistant in 1971. And to do that, I had to be the head soccer coach because there's no money in the budget for a full-time assistant basketball coach. So the soccer coach had left. So that was the money. That was my salary. So I had to coach men's soccer, and did that for 6 years. And then 1 year, Tom went to Boston College and went with him as his assistant coach. And then the American U job opened up, and Tom Young, a great coach at Rutgers and American University and Old Dominion, really helped me get the job along with Tom Davis. And so it just gave me an opportunity to be a head coach at a very young age, which really helped my career. I always appreciated that. We didn't have a gym at American. We played at Fort Myer, the military base right across from D.C. there in Northern Virginia. And so you appreciate things because you have to do some things. We all did that. We all have our stories back then. Nobody did it for the money. John Wooden wasn't making any money back then, so nobody else was. So you did it because you love basketball, and that's a great reason to coach. I always felt that as things went along, I always respected those days at American.
When you went there, Coach, and you first started, so you were a head high school coach, but you were an assistant in college. Now you get that opportunity, and just like I was 31 at Murray State, and you look back and you say, wow, that was pretty young, and I look back even at myself, but I was excited, but man, deep in my gut, I was also not scared, but just nervous. You're like, okay, this is my chance, and you don't want to fail. Did you feel that as well?
Yeah, Mark, I agree 100%. If people, bottom line is, do you win? Do you lose? How'd you do? And if I didn't win, I would have. I don't know what I would have done, professionally in terms of jobs and everything, because I really like coaching, but I didn't see anything else out there that I really wanted to do, like sales or anything like that. So I was just fortunate that we were okay at American U, and I was able to go from there.
Yeah. When I watched your teams when I was really young, and there was another time, I don't even know if you'd remember this or not, but I actually played with Athletes in Action, and you were at Ohio State, and we came in there and played you. And you had, I want to say that was Jay Brunson area. Am I saying that?
Yeah, Jay Burson was.
Burson.
He was about 5'11", 6 feet. He looked skinny, didn't look like a player at all. And his father was a very good coach at Muskegon, a small school there in Ohio. So Jay really learned the game early. He knew how to play. But he's a great scorer. He wasn't a point guard, but he was averaging 25 points a game, and we were playing at Iowa. And they were very good. B.J. Armstrong, people like that, were at Iowa. Jay went in for a layup, and he got knocked down, and he hit the floor on his chest, and he skidded into the basketball support, and he hit with his head, and he actually broke some vertebrae in his neck and couldn't play, obviously, after that, and he had to wear a big halo cast for a while. But that was a good team. We really, I really respected those teams at Ohio State because they all worked hard. That's when Indiana won the national championship with Steve Alford in, I guess that was '86, and then Michigan with Muriel Robinson and those guys, Glenn Rice won it in '89. So I was at Ohio State for three years, and also Illinois went to the Final Four during that time. So the league was really stacked, and that league was pretty good back then. That was pure basketball because you played 18 league games and no conference tournament. Whoever won the league, that was the best team. There was no arguments, and I kind of liked that atmosphere of playing in the Big Ten.
You know, when you were at Ohio State, and I remember after that game, you know, it was an exhibition game. We obviously went in, you know, in the preseason. Back then, you got to play teams like Athletes in Action and Marathon Oil and some of those other teams back then. But when we came in there and played, I just remember after the game, and Lorenzo Romar, who's at Pepperdine now, and Lorenzo and I are great friends, coached together. But I remember telling Lorenzo, even after that game, that, you know, and I loved my college coach. I loved playing for Wimp Sanderson. He was phenomenal. But I always looked at you, coach, as somebody. I always said to myself, man, I wish I'd have played for him, because, you know, like when even that back team back at American, you guys were just like tough, disciplined, hard-nosed, defended pretty well, didn't take crazy shots. You could just sit and watch like, man, this is a good, well-coached team. And so I always felt that, you know, all those years, even when I was young, you know, watching you and going against you and those kind of things, and just admired, you know, how you coach, because I think those values were part of why you had such great success all those years.
Yeah, I was lucky to have Bud. I go back to Bud Milliken in Maryland as my coach, and he got passed kind of in the ACC in terms of style of play. Vic Bubas was at Duke. Dean Smith came into Carolina. Frank McGuire was to South Carolina, who was in the league back then. And so those guys all played kind of an up-tempo style, and we didn't. But in terms of if you wanted to be a coach and learn the game fundamentally sound, Bud Milliken was the right guy to play for. He just demanded that you make a certain pass, certain way. You had to hit the ball inside. If the guys inside were open, there was, you know, there was no gray areas with Milliken. It was just, this is the way we're going to do it, and you do it my way. And obviously, as time goes by, and, you know, we get a little older and things like that, and the game changes, and you've got to change with the times. But at the same time, I always believed you had to have that fundamental idea of how you wanted to play, not somebody else, but you yourself. And then depending on your talent, obviously, you make some adjustments to a particular player. But I think you can't get away from how you feel the game should be played. To me, that was always the most important thing I cared about, is how were we playing the game? Were we playing the game in a way I thought was the right way to play it?
How was it at Ohio State? And similar, you know, and I coached at Alabama. Football was so big. We even were ranked number one in the country one time, and I don't even know if half the state even knew it for most of the year. But you're at Ohio State. Now, I always felt at Ohio State, because their tradition in basketball, even though football is so big there, they still had a real love for basketball at Ohio State. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it was a great job. I would have never left Ohio State if it wasn't the Maryland job that opened up and got a chance to go there. But at Ohio State, you know, all those people, you know, 105,000 in a football game. Once the bowl game was over, those people were really good basketball fans. I mean, they had Jerry Lucas, John Havlicek, Siegfried. They won the national championship in 1960. People love the game of basketball in the state of Ohio. Bobby Knight was from Northern Ohio, for example, and it's really a good basketball state. And the thing is, if you could get control of that state in terms of recruiting basketball, you had a pretty good chance to be really good, because there was enough good players in state. If you could get 2 or 3 of those guys every year, and then add one maybe from a different part of the country, you were going to be good. You were going to be good, and I really thought we had a great opportunity to build it. And you know, timings, you never know about timing. It wasn't my best time to go to Maryland, but I always have felt that Ohio State could have been as good as any job in the country if I would have stayed.
Tell me if you would agree with this, Coach, because I remember sitting with John Wooden one day, and I had the opportunity to leave Murray State to go to Alabama, and I asked him about playing or coaching at your alma mater, because he never went back to Purdue, obviously. He was at UCLA.
Right.
And he said to me, Mark, when you go back to your alma mater, just understand the expectations will be higher. People will expect more, but you're going to put more pressure on yourself because of your love for the school, because you went there. It's your alma mater. Would you agree? Is that looking back, do you feel there's some truth in that?
Oh, definitely. I think, Maryland was messed up. Bias had died in '77, and the coach that came in, Bob Wade, replaced him. He was gone, so the job was open. But there was also an NCAA investigation. So coming back, I did not know the severity of the penalty that Maryland would receive, or I probably would have never left. But I always thought, we could work through if we got probation. That really doesn't mean a whole lot to get probation. So I went back, but we got 2 years, no NCAA, 2 years, no live television. And we had 3 scholarships taken away from us for 3 years. So it was tough because 89, 90, 90, 91, Duke won national championships. I think Carolina won the year after. And they were the people that you were expected to play against and expected to beat. And it was very difficult, but we hung in there. And I got some good kids locally to start with. And that is a good area in D.C. to recruit with. And, we were able to get it going. But there was a good chance that was a bad move for me. Like I might have been, if we didn't get it going when we did, I might not have been coaching there anymore.
How about with the NCAA and what they gave Maryland at that time? Because I always felt it was way too harsh. But I'm not a fan of the NCAA. Obviously, I don't like them. But I always felt like that one. It was almost like public perception because of the death of Len Bias and because it was so public nationally. We have to come in there and typical. For their
they wanted to be white knights coming in on their horse. It's like they only go after schools. You get to a point where you see some schools, they get in trouble with the NCAA, and the NCAA just backs down eventually. They can't handle getting lawyered up by these schools. And they went in with us. We were in a tough situation. Obviously Bias dying of a cocaine overdose made people think, well, it's like the drug capital of the world there where we were in D.C. And, nothing is good about the program right now. So the NCAA felt that people would like the fact that they put us into such tough penalties. And, I've never forgotten that. And that was part of, how that goes, Mark. And you need a chip on your shoulder. I think to do a great job in coaching, you got to have a reason why you're fighting so hard, which most coaches do. And I had a great reason. They gave me a reason. I said, okay. After about a year, because I was really down. I mean, I was, if it was today, I would have been able to go into a quiet room that they have on campus now. And just be sad, but you couldn't do that. We had to play games, and so it was, what do we do? Well, Duke and Carolina were winning national championships, so I said, let's try to be like them. Let's set the bar really high, and it took us. I guess we were clear of things in '94, and it took us to 2002 to get that national championship, but. I had a lot of good players along the way, great players. Mm-hmm. And I had a player named Walt Williams that kept us relevant during the sanctions. Mm-hmm. And he played in the NBA for 11, 12 years. He averaged 25 points a game. He still has the record in the ACC, even though the ACC won't talk about it anymore because we left. But Walt scored over 30 points in 8 straight league games. Mm. And believe me, we didn't have a lot of people around him that could really score, and so it was incredible what Walt did. It was just a tremendous performance, and he became a lottery pick and went to the NBA.
He was a great player, and I've always said, Coach, back to the NCAA, Tark had it right years ago. They'd investigate Kentucky and decide to put Cleveland State on probation. And because Cleveland State's of the world, and I was at one here at the end, they don't have the money. They don't have the resources, money, commitment to fight them. So, I've always said the NCAA, they're like the schoolyard bully. There's a little guy sitting over there with his glasses and his pencils in his shirt pocket, and they want to pick on that guy. But then the big kid over there by the merry-go-round, they're not messing with that guy. And I've always felt that about him.
Yeah, that is exactly right. That's how I feel. And, I saw big programs that probably did things a lot worse than what had happened in Maryland. And nothing happened, basically. They were just, or the NCAA gives a school that they won in bowl games or in the NCAA tournament, they give them probation. What's probation mean? We're going to watch you for the next couple of years. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. Right? Sanctions are sanctions. If you can't play in the NCAA, you can't play in a bowl game. They're sanctions. They're tough because kids want to do that. That's what they want to do. And but they just seem to pick and choose, which really bothers me. If it was really fair, just like the idea of, I remember 30 years ago now, John Thompson, Dean Smith, Mike Krzyzewski, John Chaney, a couple others went to the NCAA and said, look, the game's changed. This is after the 79 Larry Bird, Magic Johnson national championship game, high ratings. All of a sudden, TV wanted men's college basketball. And so the schools were going to make money off of basketball. So instead of maybe changing the scholarship a little bit, because you give a kid room, board, books, tuition, that doesn't put any money in his pocket. He's still got to live on campus. And that's very difficult to do if you come from a situation where you don't have any money. And the NCAA just basically patted us on our heads, said, go back to your schools. We really care about student athletes and we treat all our student athletes the same. Well, they were wrong. And then that just added fuel to the fire for me because they were so wrong in what they did with these kids for so long.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I think part of, we've gotten to this NIL thing, which you and I are not, we're out of it now as far as having to deal with it on a daily basis. But that is a result, in my opinion, of their arrogance and that, they're not sharing the $1 billion. And, we've talked about it here on this podcast, and I had Jay Billis on. Obviously, Jay's really bright with all this. But when you hear the word billion with a B, and they have a television contract, and the players are getting none of that, and they get a little money now, but with cost of attendance and all that. Right. Therein lied the beginning of Ed O'Bannon and the pursuit to the Supreme Court, which led to now what we have is the NIL. And it all was a result of kind of a pompous attitude that this is our money and, you're not getting any of it, the student athlete.
Yeah, I think the NCAA finally, they got exposed enough where they just went belly up and they said, okay, we'll do the transfer portal, we'll do the NIL, what else you want, that type of thing. Instead of having reasonable people that could have figured out ways for the last 30 years how to gradually improve the scholarship. In other words, how about flying the kids' parents to every NCAA tournament game? How about having a clothing allowance for these guys? Because these guys are so big and they can't just walk into a store and buy a suit like I could, or things like that. And there were so many things they could have done which wouldn't have cost the schools a ton of money, and yet they didn't do. Feeding the kids, now it's better. You get all you want on a college campus now to eat if you're a scholarship athlete. But back then, you could give a kid one meal a day, and you couldn't ask these guys to survive and things like that. And it was just a terrible situation. The NCAA perpetuated this image of pureness, which they were as bad as anybody involved in the whole college sports situation. And so here we are today, and the NIL and the transfer portal have completely changed the game. To me, it's as big as the shot clock coming in. It's as big as the three-point line. And you have the transfer portal and the NIL. I mean, it's incredible. And go ahead.
I've talked to some guys, obviously, and both of us have a lot of friends, but some of the guys I know that are still coaching. I used to tell people when the season ended, that last game, you had about a month where you kind of had to re-recruit your own team a little bit because, guys would go home, mom and dad would talk to them, their high school coach or AAU coach or somebody, and you're not getting enough shots and you're not featured enough. And you kind of had to, make sure who's, your roster for the following year. And you have to, nowadays, it's unreal. It goes on and guys are telling me that guys just walk in their office and say, Coach, if I can't get 100 grand one way or another, 200 or 500, I'm out. I'm transferring them in a portal. And it just creates such a bad situation for coaches to have to deal with. And I get it, players, transfer and having a chance to make money. But the combination of the two of those at the same time, I just think there's a lot of coaches I talk to that they dread as soon as the season's over. They're dreading it because they know what's coming.
Well, I agree, and I think the combination of coming in at the same time, the NIL and the transfer portal, that really wasn't good to have it both at the same time. And the transfer portal, the thing I don't like about it, obviously, a lot of people feel kids should have that right to go and play right away. And, because coaches you hear the reason coaches change jobs, so why can't a kid do it? Okay, that's fine. But kids are going into the portal to see how much they're worth. In other words, their agent, which now you can have an agent, I guess, in college, they tell them, go into the portal. Kid might say, no, I like it pretty good here. It's not bad, playing here. Go into the portal. We got to find out how much money you can get. And that's what's happening with some of these kids. They just go in there and get bidded on. And then they don't even see the campus. They don't even know who the coach is. They just are going to go where they can go the most money. And that's the bad part of the NIL. I wish there was some way to regulate that a little bit. I'm not smart enough to figure that out, but I don't think it can stay like it is, where you got kids making $1 million. I don't think that was the idea behind the NIL and the transfer portal. So hopefully you can get under control here, but it's going to take a lot of work to get it under control, because kids are always going to get paid now. That's not going to go away.
Gary, I had you mentioned, how some people say, well, coaches change jobs and, kids should have a chance to change schools. But one thing they fail to recognize is coaches were under a contract, and you may have a buyout in your contract. And, I'm at NC State, and those first 4 years were in the tournament, 2 Sweet 16s. And at that time, I had a $3 million buyout. UCLA job opened up. I had been there when we won a national championship. My phone's ringing off the hook. I got 25 former players. They're rallying up. And then Debbie Yao, who I work for and you work for, she goes public and she says, we will not waiver on the $3 million, and we'll not negotiate out of it. Now, 2 years later, she lets me go. But at that time, it probably kept me from having an opportunity to go somewhere else. So I wasn't walking in line with the whole theory that coaches and the players are the same. It's different, because I had a contract like you had and other coaches have.
Yeah, sure. And it's just a situation now where coaches have to spend quite a bit of time on a collective, on making sure they have enough money to be competitive. I mean, the way it looks right now, today, I would say that Duke, Kansas, and Kentucky are going to be in the top 7 in the country every year, because they're all good basketball programs. They have good coaches, and they can raise the most collective money. And given those combinations of things, how are you going to beat them consistently if they always have? I mean, we've already seen Duke. We've seen, Kansas. We've seen Kentucky. I mean, you talk about potential first round draft choices being on your team. They have a monopoly on that. There's got to be, between those 3 schools, they have to have like 10 to 12 first round picks. And if they have that type of talent, given everything else that makes them a good basketball program, how are you going to beat them? I don't see how you can do it.
No, and I think what's happening too is coaches there's under so much pressure now. And again, the NCAA, to me, it's a joke. Coaches aren't supposed to be involved in NIL, but you can't not be. You're the one that recruited the kids, and you're the ones that are recruiting the guys. I mean, it's impossible for that conversation not to happen. And at the same time, I've got some guys that have said to me, Mark, there's so much pressure on our boosters. There's so much pressure to put money into a collective. The AD needs money to build facilities, and people that the booster pool is only so big. It's not like there's only a handful of guys and people that want to really contribute to that. And so the pressure now to find that money is off the chart. And I always tell people, the NCAA, they're still keeping all their money. They still haven't given any to the kids, even after all that. They still keep the $1 billion, and everybody else has to raise the money to give to the kids. But the NCAA, they're still keeping theirs. And so to me, I think that's really a joke.
Yeah, and I think that's why you'll see the NCAA still controls the men's basketball tournament, which is $1 billion enterprise. And once that ends up, that contract ends, I think it's around 2030 or whatever. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Power Conference men's basketball, because right now, all that money generated is divided by the NCAA and things like that. And, whether that will be the way it continues will be interesting to see. But I think there's going to be major changes with that. Just like football. Football is basically divorcing themselves from the NCAA as we speak.
Mm-hmm. And I've told people too that thank goodness for Dan Gavitt, because Dan, and in my opinion, has probably kept that tournament and made it even better than it was. It's always going to be good, but in my view, he's probably made it, as good as it is, and probably can get better because he's so smart and he's so brilliant, and it's kind of in spite of everybody else at the NCAA. I think he's done he's just done a great job with it.
He's got good genes.
Yes, he
his
does.
father Dave was the Big East when I was there, and nobody did a better job of doing things for college basketball than Dave Gavitt did. And Danny's, a chip off the old block. He's great in his position, as you said, Mark.
Mm-hmm. Coach, when you look back and you go through you're in the Big Ten, the Big East, the ACC, were there some coaches that, quietly in your mind, you said, okay, when we're going to play them, boy, this guy's really good. I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of great coaches, obviously, but did anybody stand out for you that you were like, whew, okay, this guy here, he can really coach, and we've got to be so prepared, or, those type things? Who stood out to you as far as a competitor?
Well, when I was in the Big East, we were all crazy. We were all young and we're crazy. And the league was young. The league had went from no league in '78 to playing in Madison Square Garden for the conference tournament by '82. And it was just, ESPN had come along, put the games on national television. It made that league sell very quickly to players. So in that league, you had Jim Boeheim, you had Rollie Massimino, you had John Thompson, you had Rick Pitino. Calhoun came in right after I left in '87 to Connecticut. But, P.J. Carlissimo, Seton Hall, you had at St. John's, Louis Cornacek. So you had all these coaches that were all like legends on the East Coast, if you grew up on the East Coast, that type of thing. So you go from American U, and, I played against some really good coaches at American U, but at the same time, you go into the Big East, and every game, when I remember you were afraid to look down the other end to see who was coaching that team because it could be very intimidating. And Big John with his towel over his shoulder, with Patrick Ewing trying to goaltend everything you put up there the first couple of times down. And it was just wild in that league. And we got the memo about fighting. The Big East, there was a lot of fights in our league. And I'll never forget Dave Gavitt just sent out a memo saying all fighting must cease and desist, bad image for the league, all that stuff. And so I called Boeheim up and I said, Jim, you have any fights? He said, yeah, I had a fight with Georgetown. Then he called Massimino of Villanova, same question. He says, yeah, we had a fight with Georgetown. So it was everybody against Georgetown in the league back then, in terms of fighting. But nobody played better defense than Georgetown. Their pressure they could put on the ball because they had Ewing in the back as a goaltender. You weren't going to get anything behind him. And so it was really tough to play against them. Rollie Massimino would change defenses really well, 2-3, 1-3-1, man-to-man, traps, things like that. Of course, Boeheim was 2-3. Unless you ever played against Boeheim's defense, you think of it 2-3, kind of like they sit there and whatever. But not those guys. He would recruit for that 2-3. They were long. They're 6'8", 6'9". They took up a lot of room, and they knew how to trap in the corner every once in a while. And it's a great defense. And obviously, he survived as long as he did in coaching by being a basic 2-3 coach. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's a lesson we all can learn from that is that, hey, if you're good at something, don't listen to a lot of people. You got to stay with what made you good. And Boeheim was able to do that when, you started hearing, well, his guys don't do that well in the pro. Well, then Carmelo Anthony came along, and I think he did okay, winning a national championship and doing pretty well in the pros. So it's you got to coach what you're good at. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. And then you go from there into the Big Ten, and you've got Bobby Knight, and you've got all the guys there in the Big Ten.
Yeah, you had Bobby Knight, who was unbelievable. The way they played, just the reacting to what you did defensively with their offense. If they had a Steve Alford, who was a great shooter, then those guys on Indiana knew where the ball was going to go. Every time down court, they were going to try to get Alford a look. And it wasn't a particular play. It was just based on what you did defensively. If you helped too much or whatever, all of a sudden there'd be a screen and Alford's open for a jump shot. And of course, Indiana's defense, they just, they didn't give you anything. You had to work every possession. They did nothing cheap. They always got back on defense. It was just great. And of course, you had Lou Henson in Illinois. You had Tom Davis at Iowa. You had Bill Frieder till he was replaced in '89. And Steve Fisher won a national championship. Like he coached 7 games and won a national championship that year. And it was just a wild league. It was really good. There was a young Tom Izzo sitting on Michigan State's bench with Judd Heathcote, who was one of the great characters and a very underrated coach, by the way, in that league. So you ran into all those guys, but it was a great experience for me. As you build what you do as a coach, you go against those guys and you learn. You pick up things, you steal things from what they do really well.
And now, after that, you're heading into the ACC, which I think I have this right, and I don't know if the whole record still holds. I'm sure it would, but that outside of Dean and Mike, I think the 3 of you collectively, I think are you up there 1, 2, 3? I think with those 2 as most wins in the ACC.
Still 3. That'll probably change. Although coaches don't coach as long anymore,
right.
They make too much money. They don't have to.
But now you're in the ACC, and for me, coming from the SEC, which I thought had great basketball, but people ask me all the time to compare the SEC and the ACC, and the ACC to me was just more of a pure basketball league. I thought the finesse or the skill level of the players were better. Didn't mean they were going to be better pros, and because in the SEC we had such great athletes, with every school. Not to say the ACC didn't, but I always thought that with the SEC. But when I got to the ACC, I was so excited because you're, in my view, basketball kind of king. I mean, basketball nationally, the ACC is always viewed that way, and so did you feel the same a little bit with that as far as the ACC?
I really. Thought the ACC was pure bad. If you wanted basketball, like you said, that was pure basketball, and that's what I liked about it. Plus, the schools were all so close. I mean, back when I started in '89, Virginia and ourselves were out of the state of Carolina. You had the 4 Carolina schools, and you had Clemson in South Carolina. So your road trips on a weekend were, and back then you played a lot on weekends. You would go to Clemson, bus over and play in Columbia at University of South Carolina, and you go down and play Duke. And and the good thing about the league, and this is very underrated, it was a warm weather league. I mean, we were as north as anybody, and so travel, you never got messed up with travel. There were short flights, like an hour flight to most places, and it was just such an intense league. And you could tell with the alumni and all league teams, basketball was their sport. They were all basketball schools. Maybe Clemson, I don't know, it was a football school back then, but it was just, and the coaches were great. Dave Odom, Rick Barnes came into Clemson, Cliff Ellis at Clemson. Guys like that were great. Herb Sindak at your place at NC State did a great job, and was probably as underrated as anybody because he was, he had Duke and Carolina. You know how that is better. I don't have to tell you what that's like to have those 2 sitting there. And, it was just, it was tremendous. But there was no easy games. I think that's what made it so good. Every game was like tough. I don't care what a team's record was. They were good, and you had to play really well to win those games.
I obviously, Dean won so many games at North Carolina, Dean Smith, but he had some pretty good players along the way too. Like I remember back, and and I always, that's part of coaching too. We all want to get great players, and great players help us. But he was a great coach, obviously, and did a phenomenal job for long time. But his talent level was pretty good as well now, especially in the 82 team that won it. That team, and even some before then.
You start with Jordan Perkins and Worthy on the team, and that's like, wait a minute, okay, who are we going to put on who? you're like, this is a joke. You know, you're not going to do really well against them. But they had, Vince Carter coming through there, just great, going back, Phil Ford, people like that. Billy Cunningham, Bobby Lewis was a great player out of St. John's in Washington, D.C., back with Billy Cunningham. Dean, I'll tell you what, one thing about Dean, people really appreciated playing for him. In other words, those guys to this day, nobody ever says, I've never heard a former player say anything negative about Dean Smith. And Dean was a good guy. I liked him. He had a good sense of humor, which he kept hidden quite a bit. But he was, especially early on there in the 90s, it was like Krzyzewski and Dean kind of bumped heads, because they were two of the best programs in the country every year there for that long stretch. And it was funny to hear Mike talk about Dean and Dean talk about Mike. It was just at league meetings and things like that. It was pretty good.
I was so against, which I didn't have any say. I was a head coach, obviously, but, we'd have our meetings down at Amelia Island. But when the ACC decided, and we had brought Syracuse and Miami and a couple of those teams, the Big East type teams, into the league, which, the league changes, everything changes over time. But when they moved the, tournament, my first few years, it was in Greensboro. And I always felt like so many people could get there. Georgia Tech fans, Clemson fans, Maryland fans, Virginia Tech fans, NC State, Duke, Carolina. Everybody could get there in a car, bring your kids, bring your family. And then we moved it to Brooklyn. And at first year or two, it was an absolute dud. I mean, a dud because, people couldn't get there. I mean, wait a minute, what? And I always looked at Jim Boeheim like, come on, Jim, really? Like you and Patino got that done, and that's great for you guys. But for the fans, for the majority of the league, I thought it hurt it bad.
I agree 100%. In other words, the ACC, and when I was coaching, I was upset because we had to go to Carolina every year to play it, and they finally moved it a couple of times. But looking back, it should have been played in Carolina the way the original league was set up. But then they raided the Big East. They took all the football schools, and once again, we're talking trying to make the conference look a little better when it came time for the TV contracts to be signed. And to me, that was the move the ACC made. They kind of sacrificed a little bit of the basketball to bring those football schools in, and it's never been the same since. It's never been as good, and it's a shame. But times change, and I guess that's what the powers that be, the presidents of the schools, wanted because they signed off on everything.
Yeah, and even with that, I look at Syracuse, Notre Dame, Louisville, and Miami, and even though they weren't, obviously kind of geographically maybe didn't fit for what we would think of the ACC, they were on the East Coast. They're still, you're still going up and down the coast. I'm going from Raleigh up to Syracuse or, Miami or Maryland, all those. And now the ACC, in their infinite wisdom here, we bring in Stanford and Cal, which I honestly scratch my head a little bit, and I'm trying to figure out what the real down the road advantage is going to be for that one. I don't know that I see it yet. Maybe it will be, but the travel, the distance, I'm not even sure the Bay Area market is a great market for college sports. I don't get that one, so I don't know how you feel, but I'm scratching my head on that one, Coach. I can't figure that one out.
I agree. I mean, here's the Big Ten. It looks like they're trying to grab as many as they can. They get Southern Cal and UCLA. Now, maybe you can justify the population in those two areas and why you would want to bring those two schools in. But, this is, you're in a conference, all sports are supposed to play the other teams in sports. So, sure, football, which, has created all this, they can charter. So if Maryland plays at UCLA, say, you fly in Thursday, play Saturday, you're back late Saturday night on a charter. What if you're the volleyball team and you've got to go out there and play? You're sitting in an airport and your flight gets canceled. So that's another day you miss school. And those kids, they're the ones that need to go to school, because their pro leagues aren't going to make any difference in their lives like some of the players that play basketball can. So I want to see how that's going to work out. Our volleyball team this year, Maryland, they go to Nebraska to play. I mean, that's a 3.5 hour flight. And you hope the airlines are on time and everything works well.
Yeah, it's completely different. And at the same time, and I probably was too outspoken. I didn't have the stature that you guys did like yourself, and I was out there popping off all the time. But, you listen to people talk about it's all about the student athlete, and it's all about academic welfare and, student athlete welfare. And the bottom line is it's okay to say it, just be honest. It's just really about where you can get the most money. And obviously the Big Ten looked at the Los Angeles market, and they said, we got an opportunity to get them. We can get SC and UCLA. It's going to enhance our money from whatever it is now, 75, 80 million a year. Maybe it goes over 100 to each school. So It's a money grab, which is, if that's what it is, that's okay. Let's just call it what it is. And hey, it's superpowers. Yeah.
See, but my only thing, like with the Pac-12, didn't they know that Southern Cal and UCLA were being approached by the Big Ten? It seemed like everybody was shocked when that happened, and it's just a shame because I always thought the Pac-12, it was a great league. It was competitive, good schools, that type of thing, and all of a sudden they're down to 2 schools.
Yeah, it's really sad, Gary, because when I coached in the Pac, at that time it was the Pac-10,
right.
And it was such a great kind of a pure league on the West Coast. Washington State, Oregon State, Arizona State, Stanford, Cal, and then UCLA and SC. And then they added Colorado and Utah and made it the Pac-12. But still, it was such a great league, and basically in football as well, basketball, football, and when UCLA and SC left, that league was done. It was over. It was over that day. That minute right then, it was done. League's over, and it's really kind of sad because all the tradition through all the years of that conference, and I don't know what'll happen with Washington State and Oregon State, but it's really kind of a sad thing having been a part of it. I was a part of it for 7 years, and it's really sad.
Yeah, you look at alumni, you talk to alumni that, didn't play sports at schools. If you talk to a Maryland alumni, they'll talk about some of the Duke Maryland basketball games. If they talk about UCLA, some of the great games they had in the Pac-12, playing basketball, things like that. All those things are gone. They're just taken away from these people. And, some of these people now, 20, 25 years later, they're the donors. They're the people that have to come up with the money for facilities, that have to come up with money for the NIL now. And I wonder how that's going to affect how they look at things.
Mm-hmm. No question. We'll switch gears, Coach. Let me ask you this question. When you went out and watched a player, and we all recruited differently as far as we liked guys that could shoot it or defend or they're tough or this or that or whatever, what were the things that kind of got you excited about if you're at a high school game or an AAU game or you're out there somewhere and you looked at a player, what characteristics about that guy that you left the gym and said, okay, that guy right there, he's got these things. What would those things be for you?
Mark, you know from coaching at NC State and the ACC that you had to have a good enough athlete to be competitive. But then once that was established, and there's a lot of good athletes out there, you kind of look at things. I always looked at, because the guys we recruited, like say NC State and Maryland, they're always the best player on their team, maybe the best player in their conference or whatever. And so I'd look at the teammates, how they felt about a guy averaging 25 a game when they were averaging like 8 a game, how the players looked at him. Does he still seem like he fits in well and he's a good leader and that type of thing? And then because he was a high scorer, was he willing to work hard on the defensive end of the court? Would he give you both things? Because he's not going to average 25 points a game, going to NC State or Maryland. So, you look at that. And then back then you could look at where do you see him in 2 years? Could he become a starting player in the ACC? Could he start a sophomore year? Could he be all league? And you try to judge that. But then the most important thing, which so many coaches depend on today, and I understand that, but to measure the guy's heart. You almost had to see him in a tough loss to see how bad that hurt him and things like that, because I didn't want the guys on my team that, didn't care, well, who do we play next? Okay, yeah, we lost, but who do we play next? No, I want guys to suffer like I did after a loss. Mm-hmm. And, it was a combination of things. And sometimes, Mark, it's a gut feeling. Juan Dixon is the all-time leading scorer at Maryland. He's the MVP of the Final Four, Player of the Year in the ACC, and so on. It came down to him and a player that went to Connecticut. The Connecticut player was 6'4", 220, prototypical second guard body, good shooter. And Juan was a little 150-pound kid but he played to win. Every time he played, I saw him lose some games by 20, and he fought every minute of every game. And I just thought, well, if I'm going to take a chance, I'm going to take a chance on him. And, he just became one of those people that, just won games for you, because what he did was infectious with the other players. Mm. They would pick up on that. And when your best player has that attitude, you're going to be pretty good.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. Well, Coach, we're out of time, but, man, I want to just say thank you. I've admired you from, we've played some golf together. We've done some things, but, boy, did you have a great career.
No, so did you. And, coaching's not fair. It's not always fair. And the things we talked about, I really believe I was very fortunate to get into situations that, I never got into a situation where I felt like everybody was against me. I was in a couple where a certain administrator was against me, if you know what I mean. And I think you do.
But, way too well.
Other than that, I was very fortunate. So, I look back now, I'm not a bitter old man. I'm happy I got my turn. And I'm really happy for the guys now that are being successful and do it the right way. So, and Mark, congratulations on a great career. And, hopefully we run into each other pretty soon.
Good. All right, Coach. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
All righty.